Welcome to everybody here. Sarah, right, Nick, g'day. It's all right. So we're streaming this meeting online. Looks like we've got Richard there. Hello, Richard. We've got Kate. She full screen. The apologies for the meeting so far. We have Lloyd McCall and Michael Laws. Any other apologies? No more apologies. You don't have a public forum. And it's just in terms of the confirmation of the agenda is fairly straightforward with two main reports. We add to the agenda. An opportunity for you to declare any interests if you have any, councillors. So let's just kick on with the presentation of the quarterly report, financial report.
Move the apologies be accepted.
Oh, hang on. Yeah.
Second now.
Okay, you are aware.
Who was that?
We've got a proposer and a seconder for the apologies. All those in favour?
Right.
So who was the proposer and who was the seconder? I'm sorry.
Proposed Andrew, seconded Gretchen. And carried. Yeah, confirmation of minutes. Let's have a look at that first. Anything in the minutes there that is needs editing or changing at all?
Excuse me.
We have got a true and correct record of those minutes. Somebody that would move those minutes, please. Yep. Alan, thank you. Thank you, Elliot, for seconding. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? It's carried. Okay. Now, Sarah, as we've done, or I think you're probably talking to this, but as we've done this before, I think you can assume the report's read. But the financial information and the complexities of accounting and finance might mean that there are you cannot assume that it's been understood. So if you can just please take us through the main features of the quarterly report, that would be great. Thank you.
I'll just give a bit of an overview first, because Sarah can take you through the detail, but just to give you a bit of context over the top, which obviously you're probably pretty familiar with the reports that we've got there and the layout that we do them. The first one is the statement of comprehensive revenue and expenses. Now that's sort of the key one, because that's ultimately, you know, it's what you'd refer to as your profit and loss that ends up in the annual report. So the rest of the reports sort of, particularly the activity reports, then break that down further and give more commentary. But if you're looking at it at that first report, which is the SCREE at a very high level, which is, you know, people, if they're only going to sort of focus on the one thing financially, because the non-financial ones is, it obviously is quite important, because that statement of service performance ends up in the annual report as well. But the SCREE, as we've commented there, we do have year to date for the 9 months quite a favourable position to budget. So we were, if you look at the bottom line, which includes the managed fund, other gains and losses.
So just a portion there. This is page 14 of 29 in the diligent report. You can on the report there.
Yeah. So if you're looking at that, we do have a surplus of almost 2.5 million, and that was compared to a deficit of just over 700,000. So we are $3 million favourable from a surplus position. Obviously, that includes we're $500,000 favourable in the managed fund line. So if you went back up, excluding that, because that's, you know, market driven, we're not in control of that, if you like. So we're 2.7 million almost favourable just from an operating point of view. There's a lot of reasons for that, but part of it is there is quite a bit of timing in there around a lot of the budget when we just phase it evenly per month over the 12 months. And some of those things, the spend hasn't caught up yet. And one of the good examples of that would be like yesterday, you signed off the Eco Fund payments. So obviously those payments now are going to go out over this month and next month. And that was the best part of $1 million of payments. So those sort of things are going to catch up. And then also within there is some other big activity, and transport is a particularly big one where the cost and then offsetting that from a grants and bus fares point of view, there is a lot of movement in those. But really there is that 2.68 million. We are then, if you go over and look at the next columns on the forecast, we are forecasting that quite a lot of that spend is going to actually come back by year end, but we are still forecasting a favourable position to the surplus budgeted deficit. So we're forecasting a surplus that'll be almost 800,000 better than what we've budgeted for year end. So that's the biggest thing that we're looking at this point, 9 months in, and we've now actually completed one of those last 3 months, is, there is a movement from where we were at the end of March. It's not going to be as favourable as then, and largely a lot of that is around timing. Yeah, so that's still our view of where it's going to be. So that's sort of the high level as you go through sort of more of the detail, and Sarah can take you through the detail of what's behind some of those, because when you look at it at a very high level, there's a lot in the activities that certain activities are offsetting each other. Like I said, there's a lot of variance in both revenue and expenditure and transport, but some of the other areas are going to offset each other. And then the final one of the reports, which is also very important from a year-end annual report point of view, is the non-financial activity report, which is the measures and targets, and Mike will take you through that. But again, at a high level, when you look at that, of the 70 odd measures and targets, there's actually a very high number are either on track or have been completed. But there is sort of a handful that are not going to be, and Mike can take you through those.
The reports are actually showing a good position for us, both financially and also in achieving the milestones of our plan. So for other councillors, the operating surplus before any kind of revaluations that we're forecasting is $1.78 million surplus. And we'll get into some of the variances that make up that. We will go in there, but I'm sort of at this point, it's probably interesting for us to have a little bit of a discussion around the surplus with councillors. And Nick, perhaps if you could perhaps give us a bit of history of what generally does happen with the surplus. Does it just get carried through into reserves, or is it targeted or earmarked for anything else?
Yeah, so it depends on what area it's in. So there's an activity financial summary, which in the activity report, so if the attachment that if it's attachment 1, 2, 3, 4, the activity financial report, then the second page of that actually shows the year to date and the forecast by the 4 groups of activities, and then out to the side of that we show the funding impact of the variance in the surplus, and you can see then whether it's going to be a general rate funded activity or a targeted rate funded activity, and from there we can actually work out because all the targeted rates have their own reserve. So if there's an underspend there, that reserve just retains it, and that will flow through in future rating requirements. It'll either be if the work's done in the subsequent year, we've already got the funding straight out of that reserve, or if it was just work that wasn't going to occur, the reserve will retain it, and when we look at future funding requirements, we can decrease those. But the other ones will have an impact on the general reserve. So if you have a look at that is page 18, In the forecast, you can see there, one of the biggest areas that we've got a deficit forecast that will flow through into general reserve is in the land and water plan. But there is some other things that are offsetting that, which is largely around we've got an additional $1 million in dividend coming from the port due to the timing of how they're going to pay their dividends going forward. They're moving away from 2 interims and a final. So effectively we're getting $1 million catch up so that it'll just work with the 2 dividend payments going forward. But we will end up with, we're forecasting, if it ends up as it is, there will be some additional general reserve. That general reserve it sits in the general reserve, which gives us that reserve buffer for unbudgeted things that occur going forward.
Yeah. I note that one of the variances is penalties on rates.
Yep.
And actually need to say to everyone that this information is coming through to us every month. This financial information and the milestone reports. So none of this stuff is a surprise to us. So you know that's good that we're getting it monthly. But just in terms of the penalties on rates, I think that's close to $500,000 that is contributing to the positive variance. Are those rates allocated? Is the penalty allocated across targeted rates or anything else like that, or is it just caught up as a general reserve?
It's an overhead allocation.
Yeah, it got that. Sorry, those penalties go to internal, and that's because although you see the revenue there, we actually have costs that are incurred by not having those rates collected, as well as costs actually that we send to ratepayers. So, for example, we would strike a penalty notice. There's my staff time to do that penalty, prepare the notices, send them to the print house. There's costs of actually printing the notice, and then there's costs of postage, which is actually quite has increased quite a lot, the postage cost there. So the line that you're seeing of the penalty income, yes, it is higher than budget. However, we would also have higher, and I don't have it in the report, but I could pull it out for you, higher than budgeted costs on the other side of actually sending those penalty notices, preparing those penalty notices, because there's a larger amount.
Just on that though, so what we do is with the rates penalties are part of the the overhead activities, so those internal activities. What we do though is any variances in there, rather than reallocating across all the activities just get they get allocated their overheads based on budget. Yep. So they don't have to deal with movements in, if you like, the back office, unless it specifically relates to them having more people. Like if they add additional people, then they'd get an additional overhead for things like IT and property and those sort of things. But these other things we just retain there. So if there's a variance over or under, it stays in there in its own right, and then just the movement, the variance up or down, will stay in the general reserve. Yep. Because we found that if we were reallocating variances, and it just so happens this year because of that port dividend in particular is higher, but in the past we've quite often had the overhead areas have been higher, and if we reallocate that across the activities that the managers are managing, they end up with these overhead allocations that cause negative variances for them that they aren't in control of. So effectively that is staying in that extra will stay in the and go to general reserve.
So, and if I can just labour on this point a bit more, the penalty rate is what? Is it 10% or what's it?
So we charge a 10% penalty on the 1st of November on all rates that were outstanding, current and arrears. So the rates would have been due on the 31st of October. Now, we do give people a couple of days grace, but we tell people not to rely on that. And then we also do a 10% penalty on arrears only, which would have been rates that were older than 12 months, and that gets done on the 1st of May and is currently being it's currently at the print house.
Okay, so that 10% penalty is covering the administration costs of incurring you completely, there's no.
So there's
that would
really
be a complete
two
match.
costs that interest is meant to cover. One is obviously the administration costs of needing to follow people up, post things, etc. And the other cost is also that council still needs to operate our services. So we still have the same cash flow that we need to pay, but we haven't got the cash in the door. So in the past, we've had to borrow funds from the LGFA when we've got to this quarter. We also then obviously don't have that money to invest in a term deposit and receive interest, which we would have been budgeting to offset. So there are two elements to the penalty cost.
Okay, I see Kate has a hand up. Kate.
Kia ora. Thank you. Just want to go back to something Nick said, and I may have picked it up incorrectly. When you were talking about the general reserves from the carryover, if there is a surplus. Now, I just want to check this because of what happens on the 30th of June. Some things will not have been done, and so I can understand those work programs carrying over because it's obviously work that we've said we need to do and there's timing issues. If there is any money carried over that hasn't been needed because the job came under budget, God forbid it didn't happen more often, that is actually available to offset the next year's rates, isn't it?
Well, the rates for the next year have already been set based on what the budget is. So effectively, that under, and to be fair, this year largely because of that dividend, we're going to end up with potentially having a surplus, extra that goes into our general reserve. For years and years, we've had millions of dollars extra spend that's come out of the general reserve. So there's various activities that some of them will be under and some will be over, but it depends. The work plan doesn't just magically stop on 30 June and a new one starts. Some of these activities are carrying on and they might not have got through everything. And yes, they might, in theory, be doing work in, July and August and September that related to the previous year. And we'd funded in the previous year. But then if they've got a pretty consistent ongoing work program, what happens is over the year, they're probably only going to spend their full year budget that they had anyway, because they might get behind in something else. If they do catch it up, then yes, they'd go over budget and if they were over budget, that would be funded out of general reserve. So in 1 year, then in theory, yes, if they're under, they catch the work up and complete their full year work program, they would dip back into the reserve again to pay for that work, which is where the underspend the previous year got allocated to anyway.
But that's the status quo.
Yeah.
The financial years always incur costs from previous years and some for future years. That's the nature of it.
I appreciate that, Tim. I think my issue is that we need real clarity on how well we're budgeting and not constantly. If you don't actually have a carryover statement at the end of the financial year on which ones there are and which ones we may have overrated for, we can continue to do that. I'm not saying we are. Given the opportunity that this dividend provides of setting ourselves up and being really clear on that, and given the very, very concerning financial situation that a lot of that the rates are making for people, we have to be really clear that we're not building our coffers at the cost of people who simply cannot afford it, especially given that a substantial number of people aren't being able to pay their rates on time, whether they're business people and recurrent ones or just mum and dads. So I think we just need to have some real clarity that we're not building a war chest. Thank you.
Yeah, we can provide that more detail for year end, because you actually have a lot, and particularly over the last sort of 5-6 years, we've consistently been using general reserves. So when you look at, and that's one of the reasons why we've gone into getting the external debt funding, because our general reserve has been dropping and we haven't actually now got the general reserve available we used to internally debt fund those other targeted rate activities that are in, that are borrowing and are in deficit. So yeah, we're definitely, if you say this year is probably unusual and compared to the previous years, and particularly because of that dividend, and because the rates penalties are higher than we've budgeted as well. We do actually have, we're looking or forecasting that we're probably going to have a bit of extra surplus that will put funds back into the general reserve, but that's certainly not the way it's been for a large number of years.
It's good. Kevin, you had your hand up, is it?
Yeah, so just taking that further, are we doing is the same treatment given to capital expenditure? So let's say we do a capital expense on the Waikura diversion on the Waitaki Plains, which is budgeted to be $2 million, and we're going to rate you for that, and it comes in because we do it right. We get a contract that does it for $1 million, and so there's that $1 million. How would we handle that capital expense $1 million?
So assuming that's in a scheme, yeah, all of the capital is that a scheme, or is that?
Yeah, it is a scheme. Yeah.
So the scheme reserve, we would have been rating for that. You've also got to remember we're now looking at the way we're rating for capital, that we're actually not going to rate now in the LTP until we've spent the money. So the money initially will come out of reserve for the capital expenditure, and then it will be repaid over the life. So then if it didn't occur, we won't be rating for it. Yeah. So I think we've got narrowing out the way we've dealt with that in the financial strategy. That'll be quite clear, and we're not trying to look at a 10-year program like we were and say, well, we actually want to have the rates smoothed over the 10 years, and we're factoring in building our rates up because something might happen in year 5. Yeah. We're just simply saying once the capital's spent, then we'll recover it over, now a 30-year life of those assets.
Yeah. So if we'd budgeted, let's say if we'd budgeted $2 million and it came in $1 million, we'd then rate it the $1 million.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Thank you.
Gary.
Thanks. So just exploring that a wee bit further on our trading element, which is we budget X amount to come in. We closely match it. We want it to be slightly above our expenditure that we're budgeting to go out across the year. We get to this point, and this year we find that we've got a 1.7 mil, if I heard correctly, amount that's going to be in surplus. And across 110 mil around about, you're looking at less than 2%. So what would be that upper and lower percentage parameter that our trading cash book would look to not go above? If we went above it, then we really would be gathering in too many rates. If we went below it too far, what would that threshold be?
But that's where when we set the budget, and this is we're looking to balance the budget. So it's a big part of what we looked at with the LTP, where we actually want the operating expenditure to be fully funded in that year. So the ideal that we want is zero, that we're spending money and we're funding it in that year. But we will look at certain things that might happen. Now, it could be, it'll be a case-by-case basis. There could be something that you might go, well, in fact, we're actually going to, do it the other way, that we are going to fund something. But ideally, yeah, it's minimal.
Yeah, exactly. I suppose that's the point I'm trying to get to, is around, well, if it's less than 2% across $120 million year, then it's probably, it's good that it's in the positive rather than the negative, but it's still within acceptable tolerances, isn't it?
Yeah, but there's also the thing of, the point is, that I think, and councillors, you quite often make it, is we're trying to aim for an operating surplus, usually the budget, we're trying to budget at zero. That's what we're aiming to get to. We're not like a commercial entity where you go, oh, we actually, if that was actually positive 10 million, that would be fantastic. Well, no, it wouldn't be, because then two things would have either happened is, we've either generated a whole lot more revenue that was unexpected. Then you go, well, if we had known about that, we could have set rates lower, or the rates was correct, but a whole lot of that operating expenditure we then didn't do,
Yep.
which means you then look, what's the impact on your service delivery around that? What are we not providing? And also, if we weren't going to do that, then again, if we knew that we weren't going to hit that level of expenditure and service delivery, then we wouldn't have needed to have rated at the level that we do. So yeah, it's it is, you know, it's quite precise. And when you're talking about 100 million plus, you know, $1 million is only 1%. You go, most companies go, oh, well, you know, give or take, you know, 5% is sort of there or thereabouts. But that $5 million, if that's got a rates impact, it's a big number.
And we only rate once a year. So the rates resolution will be coming to you in June, and that's where we strike what we're going to charge properties. So we're not like a commercial entity where we could, you know, drop 10 cents off the price to get to zero. Like we strike once a year, and we have to do it based on what that is at June. And sometimes, you know, 9 months on, that's quite a different, well, not a massive different picture, 1 or 2% different picture.
Yes, but if that percentage above was starting to creep into above 2, 3, 4 or whatever, we would be in a different scenario.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Really good.
Any further questions?
On that particular topic or the whole paper?
Well, then we can move on, I think. There's probably a few more questions tucked away, but would you like to take us through some of the variances, perhaps revenue variances? And
Sure. So if we start on page 14, which is the SCRE, so the Statement of Comprehensive Revenue and Expenses. So this is your P&L. So obviously we have the first 2 columns are the year-to-date actual and budget, and then the third column is your variance at 9 months. The forecast is grey, which is what we're forecasting to be the 12-month position. The next column is our budget, which was our annual plan budgeted figure that we signed off. And then the variance in the last column is the variance compared to what we're forecasting. So as you'll see, as I just mentioned, rates revenue, we strike it once a year. It's going to be what it is. Like we've already done that. But the subsidies and grants revenue, you'll see that there's a variance year to date of 2.3 million, and we're forecasting that to be 2.9 million at the end of the year. That's really almost 2 stories that are sitting there in that's causing those subsidies and grant revenue. So on page 7, I've bullet pointed out exactly what each of the reasons are. But the first reason is really transport. So we have Dunedin, Wakatipu and other transport. So the grant funding has changed from what we planned in the annual plan, and it has changed due to changes in our costs. So we've obviously got increased costs that we didn't have, that we didn't budget in public transport, just in relation to the living wage. There's also increased CPI costs with fuel being higher than what I think anyone could have anticipated 12 months ago. So although those grants have increased, we also have expenditure on the other side in the transport area that is offsetting what looks like quite a large profit that they're making with extra grant revenue. The second part that's causing some variances in grant revenue is really in relation to our biosecurity area. So we have we straight line fund our revenue for the biosecurity area. However, we don't get to record that in our SCRE, so in our statement, in our revenue, until we've actually done the work. So the way that the Wallaby and Wilding Pines work is that we always do more in the last quarter. So we always catch up and do more in the last quarter. There's a lot of planning that goes on in the first quarters around the most efficient way of doing it, setting up contractors, etc., to do that work, and it always ramps up in quarter 4. So those balances have actually already been cash-wise have been received from MPI, and they're sitting on our balance sheet. So what happens is we receive the cash when we get our grant funding for the year. We have to put that in a balance sheet account because we haven't done the work. So if we didn't do the work, we would have to pay it back to MPI, which is why it sits in a liability account on our balance sheet. When we actually do the work, we then record the revenue. So that's why we have a variance that we would expect to actually catch up by the end of quarter 4 and actually finish all of those services in that area. And we would expect that those sides of the subsidies and grants to be caught up and on our screen. Yep. We then have, just seeing what else, we have Other income, which at the moment we have a variance of about just over $500,000, and at the end of the year we're forecasting that to be 1.2 million. That is as that has in there the rates collection interest. Now, as I said, that's the income side. There will be other expenses sitting in the other expenses side that will be offsetting that to some degree. We also have some fair revenue variances, and we also have a bit of variances in relation to our revenue for the flood schemes. So we changed how much we were receiving from Contact Energy from the original annual plan budget. So that was negotiated this year and was different to what we had originally budgeted. Yeah. That's kind of most of the variances. We have the interest and investment income, which is just a variance. I know that it's a negative variance of 942,000. That is just the difference of a couple of things there. Some of it is term deposits. So the term deposit interest rates have actually been really low this year compared to what we had originally forecasted. And also some of that is coming through in the interest that we receive on our managed fund, with the bond values being lower than what we had originally anticipated. So we have forecasted that that should recover, hopefully by the end of the year. It is starting to recover, so everybody's aware that we've got high interest rates. Well, if you've got your mortgage, that those interest rates have come back this year, and those bonds are starting to come off from those lower interest rates and going on to higher market interest rates. Is there any questions on the revenue section before I move on to expenditure?
We'll go for Councillor Loon.
Sorry, Siri, when you just mentioned the Contact flood scheme contribution, there was a variance. Can you just explain, just tell me the difference between the two?
So
what we
that's
budgeted and what we actually received?
So that's on bullet point, on page 8, it's the third bullet point underneath other income in paragraph 8. So we got 146,000 above the budgeted revenue of 140. So if you add those two together, so 286.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't find it.
No, look, it's difficult. I realise it's a balancing act of me giving you enough detail in the bullet points, and it also becomes a little bit difficult for you to find it when I run through it here in the meeting. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've got Gary, and I've got Kate. We'll take Kate first. Oh, sorry,
Thank you.
Kim.
So on page 7, the fourth bullet point down, the lower Taieri flood protection scheme, there's the that looks like good money. What is the difficulty with the dependency on timing of the project expenditure?
Sure. So that's an example very similar to the biosecurity that I spoke about. We have received we have a grant that says that obviously we can receive that money. However, we have to do the spend. So that project is a little bit behind schedule. So we haven't spent the money, so we can't actually make the claim. So the revenue side and the expenditure side on that project is behind schedule from what we had originally budgeted in the annual plan. I am unsure if it is a timing issue for Q3 or whether it will be caught up by Q4. It's not that behind compared to the scale of the project.
Yep. Thank you. That's the shovel ready project that we got the funding over COVID, isn't it?
Yes,
Yep.
My understanding is it's not called that anymore. It's climate resilience, but yes, you are talking about.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you.
Kevin, did you have a question?
Yeah. So just going back to the Wallaby funding and the Wild and Pine funding, so their balance will still, their balance at the end of the year, their budget will still balance at the end of the year, and this is simply just a timing of.
So balancing budget point of view for Wallabies and Wilding Pines, yes. So the revenue matches the expense, and the expenditure matches the revenue, and we release the revenue as we've spent the expenditure.
Cool.
At the moment, it is on track that the work will be completed. If it is not completed, I mean, I can't say for sure this year, but prior experience is we do sometimes not quite complete it. We're talking about a very small amount, and they allow us to roll that forward to next year. But there is the consequence, we potentially would have to pay that back, which is why it sits in a liability account until we've actually incurred the expenditure, because we technically under the contract, if it wasn't agreed to roll it over, we would have to pay that back. But indications are that we will be spending all of that money and that the project is expected to have full expenditure of that grant revenue by the end of Q4.
So in the public transport grants are the same?
The public transport grants are a little bit different to the Wallabies in the fact that we do claim from the NZTA as we incur the expenditure. It doesn't sit in a liability account on our balance sheet, but the grant funding has changed from what we originally budgeted in the annual plan because we've got higher costs.
Yeah, cool. I had questions on expenditure as well, but
Well, wait, do you want to just hang on to those for the
Yeah.
moment?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Elliot, you've got a question?
Yeah, sort of preempting stuff in our public transport meeting later on, but just noting that the report we got around the cruise ship buses there said that Port Otago was gonna cover the extra spending on cruise ships. On our bus services to cover the cruise ship stuff, even though the part that we paid and then NZTA would pay the rest. I'm just wondering how that payment from Port Otago to us, how that sits in the accounts and where that comes.
Sure, I'm not sure if that has been billed to Port Otago yet, because we're not at the end of our cruise ship season. My understanding was that was going to be done at the end of the season, and I think we're still. Is that correct? That we've still got a couple of cruise?
No, I think
Sarah, maybe we haven't billed them yet, Elliot. So we've done the wrap up. You've got the report there today. We've worked out the costs. I just need to go back to Port Otago and have a conversation with them, and then we'll arrange through Sarah and team to invoice for the costs that ORC incurred once we've confirmed the NZTA component and just made sure we've got that revenue figure correct. So it's still to be invoiced.
Okay. I'm just wondering how that sort of like is. So that's just an invoice that we bill them for a service that we're providing essentially.
That's my understanding, yes. Because we incur the costs through our contract because we're putting on the extra buses. And so then we would invoice to recoup those additional costs.
Cool.
This financial report is up to the end of March as well. So
Yes,
although the cruise ships are finished now, they hadn't by 31 March. I think the last ones of them came through in April.
Good, okay, let's move on to the expenditure variances if we can.
Sure. So in the expenditure section, the largest variance is really the first one in the employee benefits expense. So that has been caused by less FTEs being hired by council than what we originally budgeted. So I have provided a table in paragraph 10, but it's actually bumped right to the top of page 9. So this shows you the FTE for the year-end budget in the that was what we budgeted. So we budgeted 352.2 FTEs. And then it shows you the quarter one, which was 299.7, quarter two, which was December, which was 322, and March, which is the quarter three that we're discussing, which was 327.13. So we have increased our FTEs closer to what we had budgeted, but we are still not at that budgeted amount. And employee benefits expense is something that's obviously difficult to catch up with. We haven't had the person here for 12 months. We don't have the 12 months of the cost. So that is why the forecast figure, we are forecasting that employee benefits expense would be $2 million lower than what we had originally budgeted in the annual plan. Now,
can we just pause on that one because this is an interesting variance, and also the fact that we seem to be operating very well with the 327 full-time equivalents. The target of 352 is still, I won't do the maths, but there's a bit of a significant gap there. So is there any kind of thought around the revision of that target of 352, Richard, or anyone else?
So it won't not a revision within this financial year. Certainly, I mean, my experience is that you never reach your anticipated full-time equivalent. It's just the nature of an organisation. Almost the larger you get, the more variance you would see just through turnover. We have that number has been going up steadily and has continued to go up and get closer to what we had budgeted sort of since about almost, it would have been September, October last year, just with changes in the market. So we have and are continuing to challenge the assumptions made in the long-term plan at the moment. And when we come back to deliberations, there'll be some more conversations with council around what was included in the draft budget, what we've learnt this year, and therefore what could we consider changing as part of or putting forward as for you to consider as part of your long-term plan deliberations. What I would say is that while we're 2 million under here, we are over in some areas in our consultancy costs, which is effectively balancing out not having staff by needing to employ consultants to fulfil some, not all, but some of those functions that the staff we budgeted for, those roles had been vacant. So there's a little bit of offset there. There's certainly a little bit of just general vacancies that we hold through being a larger organisation. And then, as I say, there is something for us to look at there in terms of how we have proposed to budget for staff in terms of the LTP and the work program, which we'll bring back to you through deliberations.
Thank you, Richard. Any further questions around that? Okay, please carry on.
So the other variance is in other expenses. So our other expenses is $892,000 higher than what we had budgeted. We are also forecasting for that to be quite a lot higher at the end of the year. So we're forecasting for a $6.4 million variance at the end of year on that. Now, other expenses is there's quite a few things that are going on there that are offsetting each other that I've tried to bullet point out for you. Some of that is public transport contracts. So as I discussed in the grant income, it's the expenditure side of those public transport contracts. We have also had quite an increase in our insurance costs, so that's coming through. I think that's pretty something that's happening to everybody in all markets, including residential houses. We've also got an increase in the repairs and maintenance expense for like the Lower Clutha Flood Protection Scheme. Now, some of that I understand is actually catching up from previous years, so that's where we haven't spent it in previous years and we are spending it this year. So we're, I suppose, in effect adding this year's as well as some previous years' maintenance plans together and to get that completed. We've got, if I just go down the points, the 171,000. This is a bit of a financial entry, so we have to class this as a vested asset, but we have grant funding on the other side to pay for this. We are responsible for doing LiDAR aerial mapping. We make that mapping public on our website so that people can see it, use it. Private entities can use it for their benefits and things like that. I understand they're used by various people in the community. So because we don't control and restrict that information and we give it away for free, it's classed as a vested asset for financial purposes because we don't have control. So we haven't physically given it to anybody. It is physically on our website for the public. We have also had an increase in some of the subscriptions in our IT systems, and this is really spread across all IT systems at council. It is based on a lot of those subscriptions are inflation adjusted, and we had budgeted for a lower inflation dollar amount than what it is. And they are also, the likes of Microsoft is actually based on US inflation because they're a US provider. So it's not even New Zealand inflation that's actually affecting us there. And there's also a little bit of foreign currency that the New Zealand dollar slipped in. So that's costing us more money than what we originally budgeted. Councillor Wilson has a question.
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't know. Yeah.
I'm happy to ask it later, but looking at the LiDAR map, I'm just wondering, there's a lot of Otago that hasn't been mapped, and if it is our responsibility, have we budgeted to do that work, but also in the long-term plan for more vesting of that? Or is that, I mean, that's probably a question for the long-term plan, but you've raised it by noting it now.
Sure. So the LiDAR scanning has a program, and it's meant to be, my understanding is replaced every 3 years is the plan, to update those every 3 to 5 years. So there is a schedule of different areas of Otago that we are doing. It is very much weather dependent. So obviously it's not much use taking an aerial photo of a cloud. So unfortunately, if we have very cloudy weather or obviously raining and things like that, it's very difficult for them to get their program completed. But I would need to come back to you with what's in the long-term plan in relation to the LiDAR scanning. I'm uncertain of exactly what components are still needed to be done for Otago.
Thank you.
Yep. Right.
Thank you. How much do we pay for insurance? The insurance has gone up.
Our total insurance bill is, if you add those two together, it's roughly about $500,000 across our entire insurance program.
Yeah. Do we need to insure? Like we do a certain amount of self-insurance?
Well, yeah, even within that, we do have some things that are self-insured. So we actually take this to audit and risk. So next audit and risk meeting, they get our insurance renewals where they look at what our cover is and what we think will be happening with the premiums. Obviously, a big part of our insurance is public liability. A big cost, which is we've got I think it's $300 million worth of public liability cover. So that's in the event that something goes wrong and council's held liable. And the other portion, obviously, we've got motor vehicles and all of those sort of things, which are just fairly standard and a given. But material damage, which is, for all the property and everything that we own. So we go through the schedule of all of that. But there is a self-insurance portion in there because some of the things, particularly in relation to our infrastructure, you can't insure, particularly things like flood banks, the concrete channels in the Leith, and for example, you can't get insurance for those type of things. So effectively, we are self-insuring those. Although in the event that there is like a natural disaster, there is thresholds that kick in that then we can get NEMA funding for certain events, but you have to hit a threshold of like it has to be greater than $2 or $3 million. But effectively, what's that?
I think it's 2% of capital value for that area.
Yeah, so there's a whole formula for it, but effectively those things, like flood and drainage schemes, we do insure for things like pump stations and those the pump station buildings and the pumps, but flood banks, drains, you can't insure for those. So we are self-insuring those.
Okay. Now, Kevin.
Yeah, and probably the other comment from audit and risk is we also look at the excesses that we're holding on those individual insurances as well to what we can handle as an excess and what's appropriate. So yeah, it does get a pretty thorough shake about that time.
Okay,
Sure.
Sarah, you can carry on.
So if I continue on, there's some variances just in relation to fuel, so that's been a bit more expensive than what we had planned. It's not that we're doing more driving, it's the cost of the actual fuel at the pump is higher than what we originally budgeted. Some of the flights and travel has been higher than budget, and I think that this is just a reflection of post-COVID times. So our budget was maybe a little bit light from what we had been doing with not traveling with COVID, and some of those projects now do involve us needing to travel. And so, that's just what's causing those variances. The 512,000 is the other side of your biosecurity programs of what we discussed in the grant area. So obviously, as I said, if we don't incur the expenditure, we also don't incur the revenue. So that's the corresponding expenditure side. And then we've got quite a large bucket, which is difficult. It is a little bit difficult to analyse because, as Richard said, We have swapped in some cases employees for consultants, and in some cases we've had to swap them for supplies and services and go out to get a third party to do something for our work program, because we don't have the employees to do it. So very much the supplies and services and consultants is lower than what we budgeted. And you would expect that to be higher, but it is across different work programs. So I have bullet pointed out the work programs that are kind of causing those variances. Some of them is the land and water plan. There's also the biosecurity program as a whole. It's my understanding that we received less grant funding than what we originally budgeted in the annual plan. So I'm sure you've already been notified about that. So that expense is never going to be realised, but neither is the revenue. So we had budgeted for a certain program level, and it's central government funded, and we didn't. Not just us, the central government funding level is lower than what was budgeted when we set our annual plan. Do you want me to go through each of these?
I think that if there's any questions.
If there's any questions on it?
perhaps, Have you accept them? Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to move off the statement of comprehensive revenue expenses and move on to our statement of financial position, which is on page 15. So this is our balance sheet, so our assets, our liabilities, and our reserves. So this is showing, the columns on this report is showing our 9-month position to what we were at 30 June. So that was our last audited annual report. And the third column is the variance column. And then the fourth column is where we budgeted in our annual plan to be at 30 June. Some of the items on this just have variances because of where we're at, that we're at quarter 3, and obviously I'm comparing to quarter 4. So cash is an example of that. So we strike rates in the first week of September. We send out our bills and they're due the 31st of October, and then we obviously use that cash during the year to fund our programs. So the balance sheet cash position of 24 million versus the amount of 14 million that we had at 30 June last year. The variance of 9.8, that's really because we've got an extra quarter of money that we need to spend. We will be spending more than $9.8 million in that last quarter. So I would expect that cash position is going to be a lot lower, which is why we've got a budget of 6 million that is in the blue column, which was our June 2024 budgeted position. I'm just wondering, trade receivables. The other thing,
you probably don't need to go through.
Don't need to go through
every
each
aspect of the balance
thing.
sheet. I think perhaps if we just note that the net assets 850,982 are significant, and the equity ratio is what does that calculate here? That don't have a calculator with me at the moment, but it's over 80%, isn't it?
It will be, yes.
So we're seeing ourselves in a very strong financial position with this balance sheet.
And most of, sorry.
Yeah, Kevin.
Well, yeah, look, I just wanted to go back just slightly, but it is on our balance sheet in that it will be in scheme reserves, and more particularly the Dunedin public transport deficit. It will be increasing. So we have we've increased the expenses in Dunedin public transport by 2.6 million, which you've given us the explanation around that. But so what I'm really trying to, and your forecast at the end is for an additional 1.3 million deficit, which I assume will go to their deficit balance, which under the long-term plan we're looking to pay that back over a certain period of time. So of that 2.6 million, what portion of that will be claimed from? That's the cost. What portion of that will be claimed from NZTA? What will be added to the Dunedin public transport deficit? And when can we, if that's the situation, when do we actually get the opportunity to look at adjusting or looking at the fare structures?
So, the first question, what we're doing at the moment as we go into year end and looking at the LTP is we're trying to tidy up what forecast that reserve position is going to be, because we're going to have to get a good handle on that, because that'll then allow us to set, assuming that we stick with with the repaying the deficit as we've done. So we have to get to, okay, here's what the forecast position is, so that we can set the rate for next year to start repaying that. Now, that might still, even when we do the wash up of all the final year end, it might move a little bit, but then we can look at what we do with, we said we'd do it over 5 years, but whether it actually changes, very slightly, we said it was going to be 5 years of equal amounts. It might, that might change, but we're doing that around LTP. Obviously, then there's the thing of, to get the position absolutely nailed down, that unfortunately you only get through that when we do all of our year-end full reconciliations, all of our wash up with all of our NZTA claims and everything. So even though we'll be setting the initial amount that we would be rating for to repay the deficit, we will have already set that when we do the LTP at the end of June. There will be a wash up and a final work through of what the number actually is, and so there might be an adjustment to the subsequent years, in year 2, 3, 4 and 5. So we'll work through that. Then the other part of your question is, when do you look at fares? Well, fares is actually something that while what we do in the LTP is we assume a level of fare revenue, as part of all of our funding. So we're not, if you like, setting that based on a particular fare structure. We're just saying this is, we do say that's how we use the calculation, but you can adjust fares at any point. You can go, right, you actually want to review your fares and go through the process to adjust them, go through a consultation on that and reset your fares to whatever level you want. What we're interested in like our annual planning, is that there's a level of fare revenue, assumed, like let's say for Dunedin, it's $4 million. So, you can do that by going, we want to get 4 million people paying $1 per trip. Or you want one person to pay $4 million for one trip. It's, that's how you work it out.
Can we just pause you there? I think, Richard, you had your hand up, so, yep.
Yeah, just on the fare setting, Kevin, once the regional land transport plan is confirmed, then we will do a review of our regional public transport plan, which will be the opportunity to consult with the community on setting the fare structure for both Dunedin and the Whakatapu services. So that will happen straight off the back of the RLTP, and it'll something that Lorraine will bring through to committee sometime in the new financial year, and we'll go through a whole process to talk about different models for fares and what that would do to our revenue, and also go through a consultation as well before, and that'll enable us to set them.
Yeah, excellent. And I just bring that to our attention because we've, Dunedin buses are another 300,000 below for this quarter of what we've budgeted on, in a prospective deficit of 1.3 million, and then we're going out on a long-term plan to ask Tapanui, who was talking about it before, Tapanui and North Otago to pay more in the general rating to subsidise Dunedin buses, and the people here aren't actually paying for them or getting on them. So while there are increased level of small people getting on, but we're not seeing that in returns of in the bank balance. So I think it's good that is going to happen, Richard. Thank you.
And we'll cover that off a bit more this afternoon. Public transport, Andrew.
Just on that same topic, I'm not sure that's working or not, but anyway, we're all green. Okay.
Just talk about
just on that same topic.
we used to.
Outside voice.
Okay. just on that same topic, when we adopted the LTP for consultation, I think we anticipate some increase in revenue from passengers over the life of the LTP. And I had a funny hunch it was something like target of 20% of the overall operating costs or something like that. I'm not sure whether it was year 10 or whatever, but there was some conversation and commentary in there to aim for that.
Yeah, fair, in the LTP fare, you know, the fare revenue is forecast and estimated to increase year on year. So definite increases, but it's that actually the actual fares that you set to achieve that is still, as Richard said, to be worked through and can be set by you post LTP.
Elliot?
Yeah.
You're going green too.
I'm on the green as well, but I just needed to jump in there and make sure it was clear that both patronage and our fare revenue are increasing. It's just down on what we had projected. So the amount we're getting in fare revenue is not going down, it's going up.
Thanks for that.
Point that was being made is we are in forecast deficit of $1.3 million to be added to the Dunedin bus deficit is the point I'm trying to make.
No, I think we'll cover that when we get into those activity reports. So just in terms of this balance sheet, I think we've probably covered it. Yes, we do have an 82% equity ratio, which means that our total assets are funded with only 18% of liabilities. So a healthy position for council. So shall we move through I'll let you take us through, Nick, perhaps if you want to go through the treasury stats.
Yeah, I'll if it's okay, I'll really quickly take you through the treasury report, just aware of the time. So the treasury report has 4 elements that are in there. The first is our a bar graph which shows our term deposits to our operating cash. So we do try and put as much cash as we can in term deposits and recover as much interest as we can on that. So make the best use of our cash that we can. The second table is showing the performance of our managed fund. So it shows you from quarter 1, 2, and 3, the interest, the dividend, other is, some of that is fees and some of it is just kind of cash realized losses that aren't the market gain or loss on our investment portfolio. And then we have the market movement gain or loss. So you can see that in quarter 3, compared to 30 June, we have made a $1.2 million gain on our managed fund. So it has been a bit of a roller coaster road this year. So in quarter 1, we obviously made a loss. We had of 636,000 on the market value of that managed fund. That had come back to a positive in quarter 2, and then it is continuing to obviously go up as our investments are recovering. The second bar graph, which is the grey and blue bar graph, shows the managed fund portfolio and how that is allocated between the different instruments in our managed fund. And the second table, which is on the right, shows that asset class allocation compared to our SIPO. All of the instruments are being held within our SIPO range. Yeah. So is there any questions on that report? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so our benchmarking of performance that comes to in committee meeting of finance committee.
No, you typically that goes to audit and risk.
Audit and risk, sorry.
Yeah, you see the full report and it's got the benchmark performance versus benchmark there.
Yeah, and that will be at the audit and risk
coming up next month.
End
of June.
Thank you.
Yep.
Just out of interest, with the revised SIPO based around the ethical investment, have we seen a reduction in the return on our investments, or an increase or anything?
No, not particularly. No, I think at this point here, I think the 12-month rolling return, bearing in mind that they'd only set it, only put it in place by Christmas, but the 12-month rolling return was, I think it was about 10%. I've just seen the April one. I think it had dropped, maybe it had pulled back a little bit, because some of that good return also was, you know, in the previous first quarter, if you like. So that's dropping out and getting replaced. But no, the return, as you see, you know, what was coming through in the year to date, the return has been very good and haven't seen a noticeable decrease.
Okay, thank you. Righto, the activity reports is next. Perhaps without sort of going through each one, is there any particular report that we need to have our attention drawn to?
Yes, I'll just touch on.
Hang on, do you just?
Oh, sorry.
You
Sorry.
mean yeah? You're talking about
What are we looking at?
still the financial activity reports, not the non-financial, aren't you?
The activity report.
I think
Financial.
we've probably, you know, we have covered off. This just gives a breakdown. It breaks that scree down into those four areas and provides more detail. But the majority of, well, virtually everything that's in there with those variances, we've covered off as Sarah went through her points. It's just a different way of looking at it. You know, the overall, the first scree you see is at a total council, and then Sarah talks to a whole lot of the variances. Whereas here, those variances will be in a particular, you know, group activity report as well. But there's nothing there that you're seeing that hasn't been raised previously. And as Sarah said, you know, probably one of the biggest areas where you're seeing the variances in the line items is in transport. And then, as Councillor Malcolm has sort of has noted, that has a year-to-date negative impact on Dunedin. We're forecasting that to be a bit bigger, but we've got a bit of work to do on where that will land exactly for the LTP, and then for the year end, you know, the year end final position.
I think we can accept those reports as they are. Thank you, Nick. And yeah, Mike, the activity performance report. You want to just pick up the main things there? That would be good.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So referring to page 25, as Nick was referring to, the helicopter view of the green across those 76 targets. I think, as you're referring to, the Chair, Malcolm, that it's that trend that you're also interested in. So when you read this graph in conjunction with the detail, you can see that there's been a change, a minor sort of change from that reported in Q2. That looks like 4 additional yellows and 1 additional red, and in fact 1 yellow turning back to green. And just a helicopter view again, those yellows are in your governance areas, your land and water, and your natural hazards, and your additional red is under that land and water. So digging into the detail around those changes from that report in Q2, refer to paragraphs 22 and 23 of the report, the cover report, and 22 talks about that new red, which is around the regional plan coast, and not meeting that target, the 30 June target that we had for the issues and options paper. So that's the key change from that report.
Just in terms of that one, we can see that it's not going to be achieved as a milestone in this period. What are the plans going ahead? I mean, we're going to catch up on this.
I'd have to refer to managers to
Okay.
to cover that.
Chair, that is now proposed to be deferred through the LTP because of the funding implications. So I think now it's going to kick off in year 2 of the LTP.
Okay, thanks.
But it's also contingent on the year plan getting through.
Yeah. So any further questions around that? I'll just run through paragraph 23, which bullets out the yellow targets. Developing a regional plan, a regional climate change strategy. While the draft was submitted to council by the target timeframe, further engagement is probably expected around that, so that might push that target out. So hence the yellow. moving down to the second bullet there, a yellow recorded for completion of the regional sequestration study. There's been a revised completion date around that 30 June, but that was ordered to you in Q2. A new one is around notifying the land and water plan. There's uncertainty obviously around that 30 June target. The biodiversity point monitoring and associated data capture, that was as reported in Q1, so there's no change there. And then dropping down to natural hazards and risk adaptation works. Again, revision of timeframes here around reporting deliverables. The new timeframes have been reported and agreed with council around those two. And the final one there around transport, that's punctual here as reported in Q1, and again no change there. And the yellow that went back to green is around the air strategy, and I understand that resource has been procured to put the scoping report together for that strategy. So we're looking to meet that target.
Okay. We've fairly well got in. It's a pretty positive report. I think that generally it's reflecting on a good performance on the ORC, good financial management, and I think that the reporting on our planned milestones is really encouraging to see most of those milestones being achieved. So congratulations to Richard and the staff for this report. Yeah. Is there anything else? Sorry. Yeah.
Can I just point out one thing on there, because I just have picked up, I'm sorry to not pick this up in the draft, under that regional leadership component, it's showing 3 reporting overdues for our annual community survey. Obviously, we received the results of that at our Oamaru council meeting, and so that should be reflected in there. So we will make sure that is picked up next time around, because that has been completed and overall it was an increase. So I'm not sure why that's not reflected in there, but we'll make sure that's tidied up.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Let's go back to the agenda.
Can I just have one?
Yeah,
question?
go for it.
Yeah, just on page 27, and this is around 3 yellows in a row. Percentage of data from the biodiversity monitoring network that is captured quarterly, and we've got a 95% capture figure, and we say the development of the biodiversity monitoring program has been delayed, which is adversely impacts the measurement and delivery of this target. So are we collecting, what are we doing with the data we're actually collecting then? Is it still being done in a different system, or are we doing no collection at all?
So I can answer that through the chair. We are still collecting data. We just haven't been able to fully implement that program.
Yep.
That's why it's reporting yellow. But we have one biodiversity monitoring person in the biodiversity science team. So we are collecting data. It's just not fully implemented.
Right.
And the implications are from the NPSIB, and because government signal some changes.
That's going to be, Thanks very much. That's all.
Right, well, I think we've got to the end of this meeting, so the only thing we really need to do is to accept the recommendation that the minutes. Oh no, that's not that one.
Oh no.
We have to make the report.
Happy to move.
Okay.
Second.
Kevin, thank you, Kate. All those in favour?
Aye.
Yes. All right, look, I'll just finish. I guess we're about to have lunch, so I'll do a tarakia of kai. Ki taku whānau, mena hoa, mena kai, kia ora.